Hello everybody, welcome back to 40 Days with Dietrich. I hope that you've been enjoying our journey together. I know that I have. We are quickly approaching the end of our time, but we have a couple more days left, and so I look forward to these days ahead. Our passage today is taken from Letters and Papers from Prison. The title given to it is Finding Meaning. And again, these titles are arbitrarily given, and I actually don't like this title, and you'll probably hear why near the end of the reading. Bonhoeffer writes, "In these turbulent times, we repeatedly lose sight of what really makes life worth living. We think that because this or that person is living, it makes sense for us to live too. But the truth is that if this earth was good enough for the man Jesus Christ, if such a man as Jesus lived, then and only then has life a meaning for us. If Jesus had not lived, then our life would be meaningless, in spite of all the other people whom we know and honor and love. Perhaps we now sometimes forget the meaning and purpose of our professions, but is not this the simplest way of putting it? The unbiblical idea of meaning is indeed only a translation of what the Bible calls promise." So Bonhoeffer's addressing, I think, something that's really quite contemporary, this notion that we need to have a life of meaning. That we need to kind of put our stamp on the world and we need to live a meaningful life. And so that's where he's kind of articulating that a little bit. And the question is, well, how do we find our meaning? Is the meaning that we have in life, having a meaningful life, simply that we live because other people live? Or is it found in the people that we know and honor and love, or in the contemporary world, we often twist that around, the people who know and love and honor us? Is that where it is? And again, Bonhoeffer, ruthlessly dedicated to Jesus and brings everything back to our relationship with Jesus. He says, no, the meaning of life is found in the fact that God became incarnate in Jesus. If Jesus had not lived, he said, then our life would be meaningless. Because the fact that God wrapped God's self in flesh and entered into the tapestry of human life, that is what is the only thing that gives value and worth to humanity. Because God took humanity upon God's self. Right? You have all these passages in the Bible where, like Paul says, he's talking about the resurrection. If Christ has not been dead, we are still in our sins, and we are the most to be pitied. All right? If there is no meaning beyond just our human relationships, which are here today and gone tomorrow, then we are most to be pitied. Because in the end, in the eternal framework of things, in the end, it just vanishes. I often reflect when I do funerals that if once a loved one dies, if they only survive in memories and pictures, well, that's quite a depressing thought. Because eventually, you're going to stop looking at those pictures, and those memories will fade. And if that is the only thing that keeps that loved one remaining for us, then eventually they just move off into nothingness. And so Bonhoeffer's kind of addressing those kind of same thing. If our meaning of life is found in anything earthly, then it is essentially meaningless because it's going to drift into nothingness. It is only that life has meaning for us because Jesus lived the human life. But I like where he ends because he flips everything around right at the end, where he talks about the unbiblical idea of meaning. And this is why I didn't like that the title given to this is Finding Meaning, because Bonhoeffer would say it's not about finding meaning. It's not about crafting a life in which you are somehow meaningful. The unbiblical idea of meaning is really about, for us as Christians, as followers of Jesus, about living out God's promises, about realizing the promises of God in our life here today and entering into the full realization of God's promises in the next life. And so the unbiblical idea of meaning is only the translation of what the Bible really calls promise. And so as we go through Lent, and as we're kind of wrapping everything up here, again, maybe a point to think about. How do you experience the promises of God in your life? How do you spend some time noticing that? Do you open yourself up to realize the promises that you exist in the midst of? Maybe think about God's blessing of your life, which is found in the incarnation itself. Because God wrapped God's self in human flesh, it means that your humanity is worthy. Your humanity is beloved by God. What does it mean for you to live out that worth and that value? What does it mean for you to experience the promise of God, the promise of God's mercy, God's love, God's grace, God's forgiveness? Just something for you to think about. And again, if you want to email me, I'd love to hear from you and hear about how you've been journeying through this time together. God bless you as you journey through the last couple days of the season of Lent, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow.